Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
How are you?
Good, good. How about you?
Yeah, good.
So sorry for all the
So what?
trouble.
That's fine. It's fine. We're all good now. We're here now.
So how is everything over there? Like COVID, that kind of stuff.
I'll just keep my head down and do my own thing. I stopped watching all of the COVID news.
Oh,
We get to. I'm still working. I'm still working for a football team. Working in the gym.
okay.
Still living my life. Still have to wear a mask if you go inside. You have to still get vaccinations. So, but I don't pay any attention to it anymore, because if you pay attention to it, you're just following somebody else's story. So just get on with life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
What city are you in? What city are you in now?
what?
What city are you in now?
Taipei.
Okay. Oh, very good.
I know you've been here before, right?
Yeah. Yeah, a couple times.
Like, I know there are like a few times David like invite you here, right? Okay. So first of all, like, can you introduce yourself for the coaches and physical therapists in Taiwan?
Sure. So my name is Greg Dea. I am Australian, so I work full-time as a sports physiotherapist, and I do that in the area which is approximately 1 hour to the south of the city of Melbourne, which is in the south of Australia. So I work for a second division Australian football team, and I work in a gym where I look after people from all over the city who come to see me for physical therapy. So that's what I do this last 2 years. Prior to that, I was working in lots of different parts of the world when the world was open to international travel. So not so much this time, and who knows whether that will change again. So that's what I do. I have been a physical therapist for over 20 years, maybe 21 years, and my personal history is in many different sports. I was a very high-level track sprinter, 200, 400 meters. I also played Australian football and basketball and golf and swimming and long-distance marathon running. So, yeah, I have done a lot of different things and worked in professional sport in different parts of the world, as well as teaching in different parts of the world. So these days I know that the world will be very different than it was 2 years ago. So I'm working locally and living locally until the opportunities arise to go and visit different parts of the world again. So yeah, that's me. So I've been to Taiwan a few times, maybe 3 or 4 times, to teach and to visit. And yeah, it's been a very good experience to see so many passionate people in Taiwan who are keen to do good things, and that's always good to see. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in from. So
Cool, man.
yeah. So what would you like to talk about today?
I would like to talk about like return to like athlete, getting back from injury, and how would you like prepare them for like getting back to like sport, getting back to the field? Like,
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is we have to think about ourselves like an engineer. Okay, so what an engineer does is he tries to imagine the final product. Okay, he wants to think about what this final product will do. So if you think about that for humans, the final product has to be very, very good at playing the game. They have to be very good at the sport that they want to play. So that means that they have to return to training, technique, and strategy. And the more technique and strategy that you can train, the more likely it is that you will be successful as an athlete. Because if we're being really honest, nobody really cares about injury. Nobody really cares about training. People care about winning championship trophies. Okay, that's the most important thing. Because if you win championship trophies, you get all the girls, and you get all the money, and you get all the success, and you get all the glory. Okay, so that's what people really are interested in. But to be able to have success, you have to spend a lot of time on the field or on the court. Okay, so let's go back one step. To spend a lot of time on the field or on the court, you have to be very fit. Okay. And you have to be strong, and you have to have great endurance and great speed. Okay, let's go back one step. To be very fit and to be strong and to have great endurance and great speed, you have to move well enough to do this over and over and over and over again. So let's go back a step. To be able to move well enough, you have to have a few different things. One is you have to have a minimum level of mobility. You have to have a minimum level of motor control. And you need to be healthy, which means if you're in pain, you're not healthy. And if you're eating badly, you're not healthy. If you don't sleep very well, you're not healthy. If you don't drink enough water, you're not healthy. And if you're not motivated and have good health in your mind, then you're not healthy. So I think if you start with the end, the glory and the success and the personal best, the personal record, and then you can reverse all the way back down to health. And so when I look at an athlete who wants to return to sport, I have to think about where this person is starting from. Are they healthy? Do they have enough mobility? Are they free of pain? Are they safe to do motor control exercises? And if they are, can we now take all these movements and put it into a training program? The training program is designed to get them strong and fit and good endurance and to get fast so that they can do as much training with their coach on the field as possible. And I think it's really important that anytime you make a decision to move from one level to the next level, that you make this decision not because you think this person is ready, but you make this decision based on a criteria of an objective test. And there is many tests which can tell you whether somebody is ready to receive more stimulus. So it's a combination of a big vision, and there's a combination of many small visions along the way. And when you move from one to the next, you have to have a good reason to do so. And of course, some of us have an understanding about how to do all of it from the very beginning to the very end. And some of us recognize that it's important to have lots of people in the team. So you have a strength coach and a head coach and a physical therapist and a medical doctor. And sometimes you have a chiropractor and osteopath and a nurse and a mental health expert, and you have to have good family and good friends. So it's a long process. It's a big process, and it's really important to understand that if it's not fun for the athlete, they won't finish. And so we have to have a role that's professional, but it's got to be fun. And if it's not fun, it's really hard for the person to stay around. The other interesting thing is it can be really expensive to be an athlete who wants to return all the way to the highest levels of profession or the highest levels of amateur, because the athlete doesn't know what to do. And so the athlete asks for professional help, but that means the athlete has to pay. But there's a huge amount of, there's a high frequency for the athlete to require assistance. So every time there's a training program, they have to pay for it. And that costs a lot. So a lot of people don't finish. They get some way in their rehab program and their training program, and they decide that it just costs too much money to keep paying for professional help. So then they stop and they just decide to do it the rest on their own. And this is a big risk factor for that person having success. So I think if you make it fun and you can figure out a way for the athlete to not pay as much money, but for you to also be receiving what is your professional fee. This is the balance. It's tricky in every country, and it's tricky in every city, and it's tricky at every level of sport. So I guess that's a big picture of how to do it. But clearly there's much more technical ways to discuss it.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to like dive a little bit deeper about like if I like pull my hamstring or like tore my ACL, and let's say the mobility is good and the movement is good, but would you like do some plyo first or like some strength first, and why?
That's a really good question. So if it's an ACL or a hamstring,
Yeah.
you could make a good argument to say that if you were to return to running, that you get a combination of very, very high stimulus, and you also get a combination of returning to the specific skill that the athlete needs to do. So sprinting can be a very functional stimulus, and it can stimulate the hamstring to be stronger, and it can stimulate the leg that has the injured ligament to move against high levels of load. So it depends. If you have high resources, then you can return to running using a graded program, and you can get a combination of specific training and also high stimulus to develop strength. If you have more resources and more time, then you can include strength training and power and plyometrics. But eventually the strength training and the plyometrics has to support the running. Otherwise, you're just spending time doing strength training and plyometrics. And that comes back to what's the goal of this athlete. If you injured a hamstring doing CrossFit, then eventually you have to go back to do CrossFit. So doing strength training and plyometrics but not returning to CrossFit is not helping the athlete. But if that person is playing badminton, then they need to do some court-based running, because you get the stimulus and you get the specific training. And if they have extra time, you can still do some strength. And part of it also comes down to if you do some performance testing after they have mobility and good movement, then the performance testing should tell you if this person requires extra strength and extra plyometrics. So here's an example. Sure. If you do a hop test on one side compared to the other side and you see a big difference in performance, then if you know that the mobility and movement is good, then there's a good chance that that person has a decreased ability on one side with respect to producing force or absorbing force or bouncing. And so you can choose which is the best type of program to change force production or force absorption or energy storage. And that's the fun part about being a coach, because whatever you decide to do, you can always go back to the test and see if what you're doing is changing it. Yeah. So I think if you had minimal resources, then the strength and the power and the plyometric training is not your best way to go. I think sometimes returning to running can provide you with a stimulus that can stimulate strength and power and plyometrics by itself. So, a lot of people, when you ask them a question that similar to what you asked me, they'll say, well, the answer is it depends on this or it depends on that. And they are correct. It does depend on many different things. But if I'm going to give you a firm answer, I think you should be returning back to some running. And there's many drills that you can do that support a person to run, low-level drills. For example, lateral skipping is a low-level plyometric. Grapevine, where you're crossing the foot while moving laterally, it's a low-level plyometric that tells you about rotation control. If you do A skip and B skip, you're looking at linear technical drills that are slightly plyometric as well. So I think there's a lot of running drills that can stimulate the strength. As you get faster and faster, then the stimulus on the hamstring, the strength stimulus, becomes higher. So if you had said to me, Greg, well, you have 3 sessions per week and you have 30 minutes to work with this athlete, I'm going to be doing running. I'm not going to be doing strength training and plyometrics. And depends how much time. When I work in China and I have 11 sessions per week where I can do 22 to 25 hours with an athlete, well, of course, I'm not going to spend 25 hours running. We're going to do a whole range of combinations of things.
Yeah, cool. So let's say if it's in like athlete, like basketball, or like what you just say, like sprinter, like yourself, the first thing you're gonna do is like do some like low level ply, or like A skip, B skip, or like lateral skip, like what you just said, and you're gonna do some like acceleration, like, right?
Sure.
Cool. Love it.
Yeah.
So that's, continue, please.
So most individuals who play sport, they have to get from one part of the court to another part of the court. So from position A to position B. And they have to do that as fast as possible. So acceleration is very, very, very important. There's very, very few sports that need running at top end speed. They usually need running from 0 to acceleration, and then they have to stop very quickly and change direction. And so most of the running that's going to be beneficial is going to be acceleration running. So it's also worth understanding that an athlete has to move in 4 main directions: horizontal forward, horizontal lateral, vertical, and rotational. So you have to have acceleration running that goes in all 4 directions. And you then have the opportunity to introduce interference. So what I mean by interference is if you just do running acceleration drills in those 4 directions by itself, then an individual maybe does not become as adaptable as they need to be. Maybe they cannot adapt to the conditions of the game. So if you introduce some interference, and interference means that you do one activity first and then you go and do acceleration. For example, you do 3 push-ups and then you ask the individual to run acceleration. Or you ask the individual to do a somersault, a forward roll, and then accelerate in any direction. Or maybe you ask them to accelerate and stop, and then you have to tell them which direction to go next: lateral left, lateral right. So you're creating a fun environment, and you're also stimulating the nervous system to pay attention to its environment. And that also plays a role in adapting the athlete to what they need to do.
Cool. So, I love the way you like talk about this, and so if it's, how about like from injury prevention side, let's say like a football, American football athlete, and from in season, like coaches always do things like core squat or like mid thigh pull, but what if I do some like sprinting during the season? Does it help, or like it's gonna make it worse?
It's gonna make what worse?
Like doing too much like sprinting, or like too much of high intensity plyo. Gonna make them like do too much.
I think the answer is if you do too much of anything, you end up with a problem.
Yeah.
And so every coach is going to understand the demands of the sport, and they can then understand whether the athlete needs to improve, whether they need to hold, or whether they improve or hold. And so if you need to improve, they have to do more stimulus. But of course, if you do more stimulus, you need more recovery.
Yeah.
And if you need to hold your performance, then you have to keep the stimulus and recovery the same. But also remember that when it's in season, it's really difficult to change somebody in season, because when they compete, the stimulus is very, 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 very high.
Yeah.
So then they need more recovery. So when you need more recovery, it reduces the amount of time that you can do extra work. So when you do too much work, unless the athlete is sleeping a lot and eating a lot of food and not going to work, it's really difficult. So from injury prevention point of view, because you used the example of American football, let me tell you this, 100% of footballers in the United States are going to get injured. So you cannot prevent injuries in American football. It's almost impossible to prevent injuries in every sport which has contact at very high speeds. So if you cannot prevent the injuries, then the best thing that you can do is to prepare the athlete
for injury,
so that when they do get injured, they can recover very quickly. And one of the best ways to recover quickly is to have a very small number of movement problems. If you have very good movement and you have very good fitness and you're very healthy, then you recover quicker. If you have bad movement and poor health and you're not very fit, then when you do get injured, the recovery takes longer. So injury prevention is not it's not a very good topic, because most people will get injured. And so if somebody does not get injured, it's hard to know if you prevented the injury or not, because they're going to get injured anyway. And if they didn't get injured, maybe they're not playing so much sport. So I haven't been injured for, 10 years, but that doesn't mean that I have great injury prevention. Maybe it just means that I'm not competing as much as I used to before. So I think if we focus on injury prevention, we're probably focusing on the wrong area. What we want to focus is on winning trophies.
Yeah.
And as part of winning trophies, it's really important that you can do as much training as possible. And the only way to do as much training as possible is to be healthy and fit. And so when you look after the athlete, they can help you win. Now, part of looking after the athlete includes making sure that they don't get hurt when you're training. I think injury prevention, if we have to talk about it, is don't get hurt training, but know that you will probably get hurt when you competition. So I think if you get hurt when you're training, that's the fault of the coach who is training that individual.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless it's an accident, in which case sometimes it's difficult to change that.
Yeah.
So if we have to talk about injury prevention, there's probably three main areas that are important to pay attention to. The first one is training load. When the training load stimulus and recovery is incorrect, or the training load jumps up too quickly, then somebody is more likely to get injured. So that's the first one, is training load. Now, the next two relates to things inside the body or things outside the body. I want to start with things outside the body first. If I go to training and somebody else runs into me and hits me, then this is what we call a factor which causes injury, which is coming from outside the body. Somebody else hit me. Okay, now this is very difficult to stop because it's so many uncontrolled variables. Another example would be your shoe and the surface. So the shoe is outside of you as a person, and the surface is outside you. Okay, another example would be the weather. So we cannot always control the weather, and sometimes when the weather is too cold, it can interfere with the warmth of the body, and it can reduce the efficiency of movement. So then the last one is the factors inside the body, and that relates to what I was talking about before: health, mobility, motor control, and fitness. So we have the opportunity to work on those things inside the body. We cannot control all of the things outside the body. And we can also control the training load from going up too quickly or from getting the stimulus wrong with the recovery. So really out of those three things, we can control the training load to some extent. We can manipulate and work on the internal factors, and we can protect the person from some of the external factors. And you see in American football, they try to protect the individual from external factors by using the helmet and the big pads. So those three combinations of things is what you have to work on if you want to prevent injuries. But you also have to recognize that some people play a sport where 100% of the time they will get injured. What we want to do is make it easier for them to come back to sport afterwards. So,
cool.
Yeah, good question.
Thanks. So, next thing I want to talk about is like breathing.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think like breathing is important for athlete, and how would you like train breathing?
Well, the easy answer is if you're not breathing, you're dead. So yes, breathing is important. But if we had to create a summary of all of the benefits of breathing, we probably should understand that people breathe differently when they're in pain and when they're stressed, compared to when they are relaxed, healthy, and in a good frame of mind. And when you breathe, the two main differences is that a person will breathe stressed and pain much more from the top half of their body. So certain muscular actions will cause the top of your ribs to elevate and lift, and it will create a lot of airflow in the top part of the lungs, but not so much in the bottom part of the lungs. And this kind of breathing technique leads to problems with the biochemistry of the blood. It relates to mobility of the neck. It relates to problems with the movement of fluid through the abdomen. And what I mean by that is if you do not have so much movement in the low part of your rib cage and your diaphragm is not moving enough, you can miss out on some internal massage of the abdomen organs. And if you do not have as much abdominal organ massage, then you can have pain in the abdomen, you can have bloating, you can have indigestion, you can have poor digestion of nutrition. And so the very simple thing to do is to understand that an athlete should have the ability to breathe in both ways. You should have the ability to breathe in the lower part of your abdomen and your lower part of your rib cage, as well as use the upper part when you need to. So many athletes, if you say to them, take a deep breath in, they think that taking a deep breath in means to pull your abdomen inwards. And pulling your abdomen inwards is not the same as taking a deep breath in. So when an individual is coached about how to breathe differently, many different internal effects can occur. And sometimes the athlete doesn't need to know what these effects are. They just need to be trusting that poor breathing mechanics can be part of their difficulties. There's another really important thing is that when you breathe into the lower part of your lungs, it can change the mobility of your lower back, and it can change the mobility of your hips, and it can change the mobility of your thorax. So when an athlete says to you, I have a sore back, or I have tight hips, or I have a restricted shoulder movement, then it's possible that breathing mechanics could be responsible for the lower back soreness or the hip tightness or the shoulder tightness. So an athlete who understands the connection between good breathing mechanics and mobility and movement, well, this athlete can look after themselves. And so, yes, there's a very strong role in how people breathe and the health and the movement of their bodies.
Cool. So, like, except for like diaphragm, what else would you like be noticing on like training their breathing, or like look you're gonna be looking at?
Okay. The length of time that they spend breathing. For example, if I ask an athlete to take, or let's not talk about athlete, let's talk about anybody. I ask them to take an inhale. Many people will inhale for 1 or 2 seconds before they exhale again. And many people, if I said to them, could you inhale for 4 seconds? What I can see is that the inhale takes 2 seconds and then they stop inhaling, which means that they cannot continue inhaling for the next second 3 and second 4. So they go 1, 2, then they stop. 3, 4. There's no movement in seconds 3 and 4. And this means that you get some diaphragm movement, but you do not get full diaphragm movement. So sometimes if you just say, I want to see you, the action of the diaphragm, you can say that an individual has good diaphragm movement for 1 or 2 seconds, but not as long as, say, 3 or 4 seconds. So when an individual has the ability to use their diaphragm for many seconds in a row, 3 or 4 seconds, I think this individual is better than the one who can activate their diaphragm, but only for 1 or 2 seconds. So I think the answer to your question is yes, you should be able to see diaphragm action. Number 1. Number 2 is you should be able to see diaphragm action for more than 1 or 2 seconds. And the third one probably is that you should be able to see this individual do appropriate breathing movements like diaphragm activity in many different positions. So laying on the ground, or in quadruped, or kneeling, or standing. And the ability to do it in one position but not in the other positions probably tells you that there's something else going on in that person's body. So there's probably three things. 1, can they do it? 2 is, can they do it for many seconds? And 3, can they do it in many positions?
Get it. So
yeah.
So I'm gonna ask about the last thing of my question. It's about like rotation.
Okay.
So when like training rotation, we know there's like hip rotation, like thoracic rotation, and shoulder, right? What would be like the first thing you're gonna look? Let's say like baseball player.
Well, what's the first thing I'm going to look at as it relates to rotation? Okay, so I'm going to do a whole body movement. So I might do standing up and ask the person to keep their feet together and turn around. And I have some numbers in my head that says that the individual should be able to turn from here to there. And if they cannot do that, then I will ask the hips and then the thorax and the tibia and the neck, and I will check each one independently to find out why they cannot turn around. But if they can turn all the way around while keeping their feet together, there's a pretty good chance that they have enough movement in all of these areas. Now, sometimes you will ask a person to stand up and look over their shoulder and turn their thorax to one direction. And they move a lot in one direction, but that if you look down at their pelvis, the pelvis is not moving very much.
Yeah.
So some people will come up with a lot of movement in the top, but not much in the bottom. So that will tell you, maybe I should go and look at the hips and see if there's a restriction in the hip rotation, or at the knee between the femur and the tibia. So I guess the answer to your question is, first, do a whole body pattern, and then you should have a list of things that you can see that tell you if the individual has enough movement. And if they do not have enough movement, you have to find out where. Is it in the top or the bottom? And if it's in the top, is it coming from lumbar spine, thorax, neck, or in the lower part, in the hips or the tibia? So, yeah.
It's like the selective functional movement assessment, right?
Yeah. That's one of the tests that we do is in the selective functional movement assessment, is that standing rotation. What's interesting in the functional movement screen is that many of the tests are going to ask you to perform a movement and not rotate. In the selective functional movement assessment, we're going to ask you to do a movement and show us that you can rotate. So the SFMA says, can you rotate? And the FMS says, can you control rotation? And so many people want to train anti-rotation. They want to train you to stop rotating. Okay, and I think that's not the whole picture. I think you have to understand that if an individual is training not to rotate, then you're missing out on some really good benefits for training how to rotate. And sometimes you have to train an athlete to how to rotate, and you understand that they're not doing very well. That's not because they're not trying, and it's not because your coaching is no good. It's because you're asking them to demonstrate full movement of a pattern that they do not have enough mobility for. So if you only train anti-rotation, then you never understand why they cannot perform rotation. So if you're a baseball athlete, you have to be able to rotate as well as control and slow down rotation. So that it's important to have the two of them together. Can you rotate and can you control rotation? Yeah.
So it's about like, do you have the mobility to rotate, and do you have like the motor control? Can you control the movement to do rotation?
Yeah.
Am I right?
So if you look at the inline lunge in the functional movement screen, you're asking the top half of the body to remain still. We call this static motor control.
Yeah.
And then we ask the lower half of the body to go in different directions.
Yeah.
And of course, when the two halves of the body, when the two legs go in different directions and they go up and down, you create rotation in the pelvis.
Yeah.
And we want to understand if the top half of the body can control this rotation, while the lower half of the body is demonstrating that it can do rotation. So the FMS is more complex in that regard, because it's asking you to demonstrate static motor control in one part of the body and dynamic motor control in another part of the body. But in the SFMA, we're usually asking you to demonstrate full expression of mobility. So both of them are motor control drills, but in the FMS we usually say, can you not rotate here and show us that you can move here? In the SFMA we're saying, hey, show me what you can do everywhere. So yeah, the two of them support each other really well, and that's why it's beneficial to have that skill, because it shows you what you don't know. Otherwise you're just guessing. And I think if you're guessing, your client is probably not getting the best service that they could get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come back to like the first question you mentioned, like to really prevent athlete getting injured, you need to have like good movement. So does that mean like you're going to use like SFMA a lot of times?
Well, we only use the SFMA if someone is hurt. If you're not hurt, then do something which is more complex, the FMS. But maybe you'll do the FMS and the FMS will say to you, the person says I have pain when I do the deep squat in the FMS. So if they have pain in the deep squat, then we do the SFMA. So if you want to help somebody not get hurt, don't play sport. But if you want to play sport, recognize they will get hurt. And then you say, okay, if they're going to get hurt, then what's the point? Well, the answer is, the point is that you want to get hurt as little as possible. You will, but let's get hurt as little as possible, and let's recover as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Now, here's another interesting one. Someone says to you, my back hurts all the time. It's not the right thing to do for you to say, of course your back hurts, you play sport. That's not the right thing to say. Sometimes the reason the back hurts is because the hips have a restriction.
Yes.
Maybe the hips do not have a restriction, but they have poor motor control. Okay. And so if you can improve mobility and motor control and then return the individual to graded training, the athlete may not develop lower back pain. Now, they play sport and somebody hits them in the back, well, that's different. That's an external factor. But you don't want the reason for the person gets pain or injury because their own body cannot produce force, absorb force in all different directions. So there is ways that you can limit or prevent somebody from getting hurt because of their own poor movement. There's definitely ways to do that. It's not going to be all that easy to control somebody stopping getting hurt because somebody else runs into you. So yeah, it's a tricky game, but there's lots of things that we can do. So that's for sure. Yeah.
Get it. Pretty cool. Like absorbing force and producing force. That was cool. I love it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, please continue.
So there's a video that I posted some years ago. Oh, it's available on YouTube. It's about a Chinese volleyball athlete. She does an ACL injury, and when she's landing after the hit, and when you look at the video, there is possible reasons inside her body why she cannot absorb force in landing, and those possible reasons relate to shoulder pain, thorax mobility, poor control, ankle mobility restriction, lower back pain, hip mobility restriction. And so there's about 5 different regions of her body which either have pain or movement problems. And when you combine all of those, or even just one, you could understand that the individual is at an increased risk of getting ACL injury.
Yeah.
So it's quite possible that this was something that could have been prevented by understanding all of these other areas and trying to improve them. So in some injury prevention areas, we can see risk factors for somebody to get injured, and we can change those risk factors and we can reduce the chance that this person will get injured. So yeah, motor control matters, and movement matters, and mobility matters. And what's interesting is that sometimes people will say to me, "Look, you're not talking about strength. How important is that?" And we say, "Okay, well, let's talk about this for a moment. When you move in a screen like the SFMA or the FMS, you're asking somebody to show us how can you control your movement at 1 times body weight. Okay. So if the person is competent, meaning they have acceptable movement in a screen, all we can say is they have acceptable movement of their body slowly at 1 times body weight forces. So now we have to expose them to show us how well they can control their body weight, their body movements at speed and against load. And to do that, you have to have strength, endurance, and speed and power. And so they're absolutely important. But if you do a strength test or a speed test or a power test, and you make the decision that the person does not have good movement when they do a strength test or a speed test or a power movement, then you don't know if it's related to the load or if it's related to the person's body. So the first thing you should do is check the person's body, and that's much safer than having faulty movement inside their body and then accepting it to load. So yes, capacity of movement is important. Capacity of movement means, can you move over and over and over again? Capacity of movement means, can you move very fast against ground reaction forces? Capacity of movement means, can you move your own body against an external load? And that requires strength. So of course, strength and speed and endurance and power are so important. Of course they are. Supported by good enough movement in the body first. And that's why we use the order. Check the body first and then check the load capacity. And if you do it the other way around, there's a good chance that you'll miss something or they'll get injured during the testing. And that's how you ruin a reputation. That's how you ruin your income. And that's how you ruin the athletes that you're supposed to be protecting and looking after.
So movement quality first.
Movement quality first. But before that, health. If you have COVID and you do a movement screen, there's a good chance that you won't move very well because your body's not very healthy. So
okay.
Yeah.
So did you like get vaccinated?
Yeah. So I got vaccinated. I got my third vaccine 3 days ago.
Oh.
So I was pretty tired the last 2 days. Even today, I'm still just a little bit fatigued. 3 days after the vaccination. So yeah, here in Australia, the rules are if you work in health and if you do not get the vaccination, you are not allowed to go to work.
Oh.
And you may receive a fine. So for me, the decision is, well, I want to help people and I want to continue to earn a living. And if I do not get the vaccination, I cannot do either of these two things. So it's not an easy time to be in existence, but everybody makes their own decisions individually. So for me, the decision was, let's get vaccination.
So I know you like do coaching and physical therapist, and you have a website. You also like do education. So like the last thing, can you like tell everyone if they're interested in what we talk about today, or what if they have like further question? Where can they reach out to you?
Well, Instagram is easy. You can send me a direct message on Instagram, and then depending on what the question is, I can direct you to any other resource, whether it's YouTube or website or Facebook, or even some of the articles which are on different websites like OTP Books or functionalmovement.com. So usually Instagram is a good first step. Yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. That's all the questions for today. Thank you. Sorry for all the trouble.
Sorry for all the trouble. No trouble at all. Not all trouble. Yeah. You have a good day.
Yeah, see you.
See you. Bye.
Bye.